Howdy Smite fans, it's J-Mac. Week number 5 was our final week of regular season play before we move into the group stages. We had a few more crucial matches that we had to go through before we could get to that point. Let's take a look back at week number 5 and see what all happened in this week's SPL Weekly Recap. Our first match of the weekend was the Camelot Kings facing off against the Valkyries. The Valkyries? They wanted a win for the phase. The Camelot Kings needed this win heading towards the group stage. In this bout, it turns out that the need was much stronger than the want. The Valkyries were able to put up a good fight in game number 1, but ultimately the Kings were able to outplay the janky drafts coming from the Valkyries. In game number 2, the Kings just jumped in on the fun. Jank drafts and fun games aside, the Kings were able to get a win over the Valkyries here and take the set 2-0. Now, normally while I'd advise you to go back and watch every set, if there's one that you need to go back, it would be our second set of the day featuring the Olympus Bolts and the Tartarus Titans. Game 1 was a fairly close race to start. The Titans and the Bolts were able to trade early blow for blows and early objective for objective. Well, that is until the Bolts bait a fight around the Gold Fury. The Titans get an early pick in the fight, but Haddock's and Lazarus' damage are just too much, and they're able to outdamage the sustain of the Titans, netting 2 double kills, 1 for each of them, and then a Fire Giant right after. The Bolts didn't win off the Fire Giant. They were able to tactfully remove the structures off the map, and then make one final push down the mid and close out game 1. Game number 2 starts out pretty much the same as the previous, both teams trading blow for blow, but it's the Titans who were able to pull a small gold lead. The Titans force a bad fight under the Bolts tier 1 mid tower, and it's the Titans who end up losing the fight. But it's not just the fight, they also lose on both of the mid towers, but somehow still come out by grabbing the Fire Giant for themselves. But then they do lose the fight immediately afterwards. The Bolts are able to hold control of the game, but not without some struggle. And in a final attempt to stop them, the Titans tried to take a late game Fire Giant away from the Bolts, but end up getting wiped in the process. With the minions pouring down the left side, the Bolts are able to close out the set 2-0. And on Sunday, we start off with our first set between the Jade Dragons and the Oni Warriors. With no weight against the standings here, the Warriors decide they're going to have a little bit of fun. They make a full team role swap in both of our games and drafted some rather unorthodox comps. But the Dragons were having none of that. Game number 1 started off well for Vote, but the Dragons were able to shut out the rest of the Warriors and take game 1. Game number 2, well, that one was even more lopsided for the Dragons. They were able to end their season on a 2-0 win here over the Oni Warriors. And our final set of the week was the Atlantis Leviathans facing off against the Solar Scarabs. Game 1, we saw action right out of the gate for the Scarabs, but Leviathans never really lost control of the game. Shinto was given way too much leeway in all of these team fights, and the Leviathans were able to shred through this Cthulhu Morrigan comp and take game number 1. And game number 2 starts with a bloodbath in the duo lane. Constant fighting and pressure from the Scarabs is able to net them an early lead, one that they were never really losing. Leviathans struggled to stay relevant in team fights, but they never shied away from at least putting up a fight. The Scarabs strip away all 3 Phoenixes and amass a nearly unstoppable lead. But one systematic pick in the jungle and one small team fight outside the base allowed for the Leviathans to be able to hold on to their 3 Phoenixes after respawning. And with that, Leviathans push forward and are able to steal away the enhanced Fire Giant from the Solar Scarabs, taking not just the fight, not just the Fire Giant, but game 2 and the set. Our last games of the first half of the phase have completed, and with it, the Atlantis Leviathans and the Olympus Bolts come out as your number 1 and 2 seed respectively. Immediately after the games took place, we had a draft to determine what the groups would look like moving to the second half of the phase. Group A is as follows: the Atlantis Leviathans, the Camelot Kings, the Jade Dragons, and the Valkyries. And Group B will consist of the Olympus Bolts, the Tartarus Titans, the Oni Warriors, and the Solar Scarabs. Group stages will kick off on October 29th, and we hope to see you there. But if you ever do miss out on any action, don't worry, I'll always have you covered in the SPL Weekly Recap.